Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Wednesday, August 24th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris. I'm back from my little vacation. It was, a vacation from the norm. I didn't go anywhere far away. People came to me.
Staycation.
Yeah, staycation with visitors, which actually was pretty great. So happy to be back and talking baseball with you, Eno, on this episode. We got a couple big news things we're going to talk about. Walker Buehler actually underwent a second Tommy John surgery, so we'll talk about the long-term implications of that. We learned that Fernando Tatis Jr. is going to have the shoulder surgery that we wondered about for a long time while he serves his suspension, so some major changes there. It looks like Cade Cavalli is going to come up and debut with the Nationals by the end of this week. And we might see a few other top prospects get chances here at the end of the season due to a rule change in the collective bargaining agreement. That's kind of interesting. Oneil Cruz broke Statcast again, so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about some difficult stretch run decisions that are starting to pop up. Of course, new pitchers and new players emerging in the pool each and every week, and trying to figure out how much we trust those guys against some of the players we've been leaning on all season. That's among the more difficult things that we can be faced with this time of year. But we should start with Walker Buehler. Second Tommy John surgery for him. And when the Dodgers first announced that he was going to have surgery, it was kind of in the back of my mind as something that I thought was at least possible, because they were not clear about what exactly was going to take place once he had that surgery. But we have learned that is exactly what has happened. Given that it's his second Tommy John, it's a longer recovery window more often than not for something like that. And given the timing, it doesn't seem like we'd see Walker Buehler pitch in a game until the beginning of the 2024 season.
Yeah, and the chances that it doesn't take or take hold, or the chances of a negative outcome are higher. I think we're on the level of sort of 5 to 10% for number one, and I think number two is closer to 25 to 30% don't work out. So definitely some risk there that wasn't there before, or at least it wasn't as bad the first time he had Tommy John. What do you do in a dynasty league? I feel like it's a real tough one. I think I might even sell low, because not only is there the fact that you don't get anything this year and you don't get anything next year, but then there's the fact that the first year back from Tommy John, you lose command, fastball command. That's been pretty well documented by research. So you may not even get full Walker Buehler until 2025. He might be of best use to you as almost a prospect piece to a rebuilder.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think he's tricky because he's already 28. He just turned 28 at the end of July. So he's going to miss his age 29 season. He's going to come back at age 30 with these concerns.
After having had some velo loss too.
Right. So then you're talking about maybe age 31 when you're really excited about what he's able to do, because he'd be far enough away from that second surgery where workload would be less of a concern. Maybe the command would be all the way back. What kind of pitcher is he going to be like after going through all of that? Very fair question to ask. And I believe he's lined up to be a free agent after 2024. So there's going to be incentive for him to obviously get all the way back, go get that payday. And it could happen. It absolutely could happen. But yeah, that long-term league scenario you're describing, waiting this one out probably isn't a good idea. And you say that knowing the returns you're likely to get in a trade are probably underwhelming. So I'd be very curious to see what has been out there, if he's been moved in any sort of dynasty keeper leagues that are out there. Is it for one prospect? Are you getting that kind of return back? Are you getting old players, the guys that are on the wrong side of 35 that might make you better right now, but really have no long-term value? I would guess it's probably returns more like the latter than the former right now, given the timetable, given all these factors.
Dynasty League, would you rather Walker Buehler or Miles Michaelis?
Oh, Lord. I'm okay.
Decent, would you rather? Decent? Old guy, I get that pitches now, you get a better guy later?
I mean, let's assume just a sort of neutral situation. If I'm not playing for a title right now.
You're a contender. You're a contender. You have Walker Buehler. You need pitching.
if I can't find something better, maybe that's the kind of trade I have to make because you want to win that title.
Miles Michaelis pitching pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, sub 20% K rate, not really walking anybody, doing it over a pretty good volume of innings, probably going to come in close to 190, maybe 200 innings by the end of the regular season, plus some postseason innings. He's worked, at that level before.
He wouldn't be like an amazing keeper for next year, but like look at your roster and be like, am I really keeping Walker Buehler in this situation for next year? Like, it depends a little bit on how many keepers you have, how deep the league is, and so on and so forth. But
how much
you could use him as a trade piece if you still have time before your trade deadline.
How much value do you put in rest of season projections today, giving you a baseline expectation for what you would expect in 2023? I mean, this seems like the starting point of next year's projection. And if you look at Miles Michaelis in that light, a 3.85 ERA, a 121 WHIP, a low strikeout rate, that's not a bad pitcher. Those are the ratios of kind of a top 40, top 50 starting pitcher. That plays pretty well. We know the defense behind him should still be good. Busch Stadium should be a decent place to pitch. NL Central is not going to magically get a lot better in one off season. It's not built with teams like that. I mean, the worst thing that could happen as far as the division context would be the Cubs going after multiple big free agents and trying to accelerate their rebuild by spending their way through it. Not impossible, but even that's still not a nightmare scenario for the other pitchers in the NL Central. What's a bigger factor, though, is the new schedule.
That is going to do the segue sound. Yeah. I mean, just one last thing real quick about Michaelis is that certain skills are stickier year to year than they are in season. So in season, you could say he has good command. Everything looks good. Season to season, you'd be like, well, how good is his stuff? So his seasonal projection may actually be worse than what you're seeing in season because his stuff level is lower. However, I do think the new season, actually, the new schedule probably is a net, for him, might be a net negative.
It would be a slight loss for the Cardinals, right? Facing NL Central opponents less often is worse for sure.
The new schedule came out and it looks like, there's plus or minus a game or two, but it looks like you face other teams in your division about 10 times. And that's less than it was before. And so there's going to be more noise in matchups every given season because you're just going to, sometimes you get the Marlins and sometimes you get the Phillies. You know what I mean? And it will be a less balanced schedule. Some people will call it a more balanced schedule because you're not fighting in the division so often. But in some ways, it's a less balanced schedule because there's more noise given on what random AL West team you got. Like, did you get the Astros or the A's? And so there's going to be more chaos when it comes to the schedule. But at the same time, if you are in the AL East, fewer times against the Yankees, fewer times against the Blue Jays, I'll take it.
Do you give significant upgrades to all AL East pitchers, or do you give greater upgrades to your more fringy players that would be in and out of your lineup in the current format? Right. I mean, here's the thing that I'm trying to say is that with someone like Garrett Cole, he plays against everyone and you end up getting the good results. And while his results will improve, you're not playing that in-out game anymore with the formerly Jordan Montgomery types. Jordan Montgomery.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it more like Jordan Montgomery. I think it like Jordan Montgomery, Ross Stripling,
Orioles pitchers, all
Austin
of them.
Both,
the trust level for Orioles pitching as they keep going through their process, that goes up when you're not seeing as many matchups against the Yankees and the Jays, the Red Sox, Rays. Like, that's a big difference.
Yeah, and I mean, it'll be in the projections, right? Because every projection system has park factors and has strength of, opponent factors and all that stuff. It'll be baked in to some extent. But really, it'll be that last little toggle that's in your own head when you look at a guy and you say, am I really going to take an AL East pitcher right here at this point in the draft? Or should I take this guy who pitches for the Marlins, And then you're like, oh, wait, I just took Eliezer Hernandez over Austin Voth. I should probably have taken Austin Voth, And I think that's the kind of mental toggle you just have to be aware of next year and try to keep your mind fresh, basically, because it'll be a fresh new schedule.
Yeah, it's not unlike the changes we already had to make, those mental adjustments of NL pitchers facing DHs, right? We already went through this where your in-moment decision-making when you're on the clock with a minute or when a player is up for bid in an auction, you already had to make that switch once where you're not just favoring the NL pitcher because they face the pitcher spot in the lineup anymore. We're talking about that kind of change, because you're exactly right. The numbers will have that.
Yeah,
the numbers will have that cooked in. All the projection systems will have the adjustment. You're just going to see. So you're going to see some surprisingly, I think, good ratios for pitchers in the AL East compared to previous expectations. You're going to see some bumps for guys in the NL Central going the other direction. That's just going to be the nature of how this ends up playing out.
And we're seeing it. We've started with Miles Michaelis. We returned to Jordan Montgomery. Seeing it a little bit in real time where you just take Jordan Montgomery out of that park. And yes, we don't know exactly how St. Louis is playing, but it's going to probably play easier than New York. And then you take him out of that division and you put him up against some easier lineups. And Jordan Montgomery all of a sudden looked like an ace. I think there's some things going on under the hood. I'm not going to pretend that like there was zero changes and we shouldn't give the Cardinals any benefit for their coaching process, because they have changed his fastball mix a little bit. He's throwing the four seam more than the sinker. And for what I look at in my numbers, I think it's because he can command the four seam better. This is the first four start stretch of the season for Jordan Montgomery where his location plus has been above average for 4 straight starts. And I think back to Luis Garcia, the reliever, who showed up there, and I think everyone had told him to throw the four seam because everyone's throwing the four seam and you need more whiffs, your reliever, whatever the reason was, but he could not command the four seam high in the zone. And the Cardinals said, just throw the fastball you can command, dude, and he went to the sinker and had a lot of success. So I think there's probably an emphasis on command in that St. Louis organization when it comes to pitching, which is weird because not all of them have great command, but at least when you look at one pitcher, throw the pitches you can command better.
Yeah, one extra adjustment though for Montgomery beyond those other factors. I think it was easy for me to look at that park change plus defense plus Yachty factor, like that in and of itself. He could have changed nothing and was probably going to get better results, but making one more change on top of that could be something that people might have overlooked because it's not as easy to see that or to account for that right away with that move to a new team. Let's get to Tatis for a moment. He has decided to have the shoulder surgery that was kind of lingering in the background this entire time. Had the wrist injury, of course, that cost him this season, then got the 80-game PED suspension, which will cost him time into 2023. From a keeper dynasty, long-term Padres perspective, all the different factors that we think about with Tatis, does the decision to actually have the surgery now make you feel better about him in the long run? Avoiding surgery tends to be the ideal outcome if you can, but this seemed more like an inevitability anyway. So where do you fall on Tatis now that we have this added bit of information? I know that our friend Rob DiPietro had an early 2023 draft at the end of last week, I believe that was. I was gone, so the timing's a little fuzzy. And Tatis went at pick 4-2, so that would be, doing the math, 47 overall. That was before the surgery news was revealed on Tuesday. So I would imagine with added risk and recovery time, maybe this could leak even a little bit beyond a suspension. We'd probably see Tatis go even later now that we know that he's had this surgery.
I think I'd want to get him in the back end of the top 100. I would want him to drop another 3 rounds.
Yeah, so 2 to 3 rounds if you're in a 15-team league to get into that range.
Here's my thinking. Dan O'Dowd was on the MLB Network saying that they did not have much success with this surgery in particular in his organization when he was running it. And then I have a name that's on the forefront of my mind when I think of the surgery, which is Cody Bellinger. And That's a little bit more complicated because maybe he had some weaknesses within the zone in terms of his approach. Maybe he had some holes that maybe Tatis doesn't have. However, if you look at them, there are some similarities where you've got the sort of athletic peak, high strikeout rate, high walk rate. What if the high strikeout rate suggests that Tatis could be pitched to, somewhere in the zone? He's got some sort of hole. And then you throw in a weakness in the shoulder, he loses some power. And then, of course, the elephant in the room, how long has he been doing these performance enhancers, and, what effect will that have? I think that previous study has done a bad job of figuring out how much performance enhancers help, mostly because we don't know when they start or stop doing it, like I said. So I would say big question mark with the performance enhancers, big question mark with the surgery, very small question mark with the plate approach. Is not too far off of Cody Bellinger coming off of surgery.
Okay. Thinking about this a few different ways. One, with all the question marks, imagining a Riddler jacket for
how big the question marks,
little question marks, little top hat with the question marks on it. All fair. I mean, in terms of the things you just outlined and how much I'm worried about them, the shoulder surgery is now at the top of the list.
Mm-hmm.
The wrist injury, which was taking him a while to come back from, I think that's still second. I'd probably put the PED questions third and put the strikeout rate fourth.
Mm-hmm.
of how worried I am, how big the question marks actually are on those particular items. I think the other part of the Tatis profile compared to Bellinger, that I think you're right to point out the similarities in terms of the surgery itself. The other thing that would give me some optimism relative to previous norms with Tatis is a lot of the value that Tatis brings also comes from the stolen bases. Bellinger runs, like he's had that stolen base part of his profile, but it's more balanced from a rotisserie perspective by comparison. There are more ways it can go right. If Tatis loses some power, but continues to draw walks at a similar clip to what he had pre-surgery, and even if the K rate doesn't get better, we're still talking about a guy with a 350 OBP potentially that could steal 30 plus bases pretty easily. He's still so young. I mean, after all this lost time, once he's back on the field, presumably in the first half of 2023, Tatis is still going to be just 24 years old. And that's a reasonable difference even compared to the Bellinger situation as well.
There's also, I would add maybe a scouting component to this, which is I'm trying to look at it now, but do you have an idea off your head where Tatis's hole is in the strike zone?
For some reason, in my mind, I could be dead wrong and everyone's going to laugh at me. Down and away for Tatis seems like the problem spot.
Yep. Yeah. Down generally. He's a good high ball hitter. Down and in is no, that's good contact. Yeah. So down and away. Yeah. Down and away, which is, I think, superior to having a high in the zone hole.
It's a more normal place to miss.
Yeah, right. It's also a place that you can learn just to spit on, I think. And then the pitcher will hit it sometimes, you strike out, and the pitcher will miss it a bunch and you don't strike out, right? Whereas high in the zone, if you just can't hit, it's also down and away is more specific, right? It's a corner.
It's a smaller target. Whereas it's better Bellinger, command of a nastier pitch to hit it. Throwing hard up in the zone is easier to do, relatively speaking.
And then Bellinger was more like 3 quadrants high and not just high and away or high and in or something. So, so I think there is a bit of a scouting component to where the hole is and how likely Tatis would be to be able to cover that up or be productive even with that hole. Because there's not that many hitters that are great at low and away. Mm-hmm. It's kind of one that he shares with a lot of people. So, yeah, right. The strikeout rate is the least of the worries, but all those worries add up to me not really wanting to spend all of next year, the first half of next year, on pins and needles, waiting for updates. pictures, grainy photos, grainy workout videos. Like I'm thinking of like the Ronald Acuna stuff where it's like, oh, he's jumping around on some stuff, oh, he must be ready. I don't want to do that.
I don't need the videos.
And Acuna himself
Tatis,
has not been, I drafted Acuna in the first round thinking I was getting a deal. And I don't think I'm getting first round value back from Acuna.
Not yet. We talked about it, though. Maybe you get it for the final month of the season where the power catches up and then it all sort of comes together at just the right time for him as the Braves get ready for another deep postseason run. I think the would you rather questions with Tatis in long-term leagues are more interesting than the short-term leagues. We talked about the ability to just say, no, I'm not playing this game with Tatis. If you're in a league with no IL spots, the calculus there is very different. If you're in a league with IL spots, that's a little bit different because the per game production you will get without having to play as short on the bench, that might be worth the risk. That point where those two lines intersect might make a lot more sense. But our early draft and hold and an FBC and those kinds of conversations,
I generally think that
are different.
Dynasty and keeper leagues usually have either IL slots or deep benches to keep people from having to make a decision based on injury because short term, it makes sense. Keep the waiver wire full of actual good players, make people make decisions about injury. And that makes a lot of sense. I think in a long-term league, you're thinking pick the right players, build the right type of team and win. And you shouldn't have to drop a guy just because you're stuck because of injury. So I tend to think of a good would you rather for Tatis as being somebody like Dansby Swanson.
I'd keep Tatis if that were the 1v1 option that I had.
Even if you're competitive.
It's weird because the difference, we just talked about Buehler and thinking about the long-term concerns there. It's going to take Buehler a lot longer to come back and then be himself than it presumably will take Tatis to come back and be himself. Timetables are totally different, even though the severity of the surgery should not be overlooked. I would look at Tatis and say, I don't have this problem. I don't have many keeper or dynasty situations. I wouldn't have that same sort of panic feeling. And I realize there's a big difference in starting points between where they're valued at today in the first place. But if you were trying to get Tatis, if you're trying to sort of throw something out there to someone who wasn't panicking but was willing to listen, is Michael Harris a fair straight up offer? Or would you rather just have Harris? Would you not even make that offer if you were the person that had Harris on your roster right now?
Well, it's funny because I was thinking about Bichette as another would you rather at the same position. And in some ways, Michael Harris seems like a Bichettian type player. Very high chase rate, goes oppo a lot, steals bases. Maybe and Bichette, to be fair, was really successful when he stole bases just last year. Like 25 out of 26 last year, 7 out of 14 this year. Just the chase rate alone makes me think that there's a possibility Michael Harris is overvalued right now. And if you look at the projections, which, hey, maybe it's too early in Michael Harris's career to look at the projections. Maybe he's still quote unquote a prospect, but we do have almost 300 plate appearances of this poor chase rate, of, this barrel rate, which is pretty good, but of the swing strike, the strikeout rate, this walk rate. So we do have information from him at the major league level. His projection basically is pretty similar to all of them, which is 250 to 260 batting average, very low 300s OBP, and slightly below league average, around league average power. Bichette right now, as like his actual results versus his projected, 250, 260 average, 300 OBP, and league average power. So, yeah. I think you could get more for Michael Harris. No, you couldn't. More for Michael Harris than Tatis? I
think that's, to me, it's a really interesting challenge trade.
I think it would be a good use of Michael Harris.
Okay. So that's a reasonable place to put things. I mean, I'm looking beyond the O swing percentage, though. Michael Harris has an 11.9% barrel rate, That's better than Bichette's career rate so far. It's better than Bichette was when he first arrived in the big leagues in 2019. And the hard hit rate underneath that barrel rate is comparable to Bo Bichette's, even though since the start of last season, Bichette's a little bit higher than that level. I do think the similarities are real just in terms of the plate skills. Low walk rate for both players. I wonder, looking back at the minor league walk rates for Bo Bichette, even those are a shade lower than what Harris has done. So I wonder if Harris actually has a little more room for OBP than Bo Bichette does. And we talked about this on the 3-0 show. Caitlin McGrath joined us, so we had a lot of Blue Jays talk. With Bo, I think there's a legitimate question about having a hit tool that's so good that you do things that aren't necessarily optimal for outcomes with it. You can hit pitches you shouldn't be able to hit, and therefore you don't drive as many pitches as you could if you were a little more patient. The question with both of these players is, how much can they learn that? And are you more willing to look at a player like Harris, who's earlier in his career, and have optimism about it compared to Bichette, who's been in the league for a few years and has used the same approach and been able to do really good things with it? I mean, this works for Bo Bichette. I don't know if we can reasonably say they have equal hit tools. I don't think any scouting reports would have them on the exact same page, but looking future 55 for Harris, according to Fangraphs, future 60 for Bichette, back when they put that up for him, they're not that far off in that regard. So is it more correctable for a younger player, or is it better to have the certainty that you can do enough to be productive over that longer stretch, the way Bichette has been through the early part of his career?
Yeah. I was looking at his rolling. I often look at the rolling charts on Fangraphs to just get a sense of how that player's day-to-day approach to his chase rate has changed. And that's just interesting. He's had peaks this year where he's been chasing more than half the pitches he's seen outside the zone. Harris. He's improved, but the valleys are still around 40%. So I think this is an actual real concern for Harris. Of course, he could take a big leap in his second year like Acuna did in the same stat, in the same way. But given this set of skills that he's showing right now, I think there's going to be a little bit of regression next year.
And I would also throw this out there as an open-ended question. I don't expect you to have the answer. I don't expect anyone to have the immediate answer to this. But if we saw consistently better swing decisions throughout time in the minor leagues, would that matter? Or is just the quality of stuff difference between high A, double A, and the big leagues so wide that that's not necessarily a bankable skill when you're talking about the quality difference in the pitching that we're facing?
Just as a comparison, and they're not exactly the same types of players, but here on this level, I think they can be a little bit of a comparison. Oh my goodness. I think Matt Olson just hit a grand slam. Yes, he did. It's 13-0. Okay. Look at the rolling chart for Bobby Witt Jr. Bobby Witt Jr. came in with a very poor reach rate, chase rate, whatever you want to call it. God, get rid of reach rate. Stop calling it. And it was over 45% for the first 25 games of his major league career. There's been it just cratered or just went down from there to where it's been higher than 40% for more than like 2 games at a time. And it's gone all the way down below 30% for a 10-game stretch. So when you look at his chart, for you YouTubers, and which way is the right way?
Yeah, you're working on that. I'm getting the chart. I'll have it in a second.
All right. So Bobby Witt up and then down, little up, down, right? This is Michael Harris. Up, down, up, down, up, down. You know what I mean? So it's like, I would want to see over the course of your first season more of the Bobby Witt chart than the Michael Harris chart, right? Like that's real improvement in recognition of the strike zone. And I think that each time that it goes back up again, yes, teams like other teams are scouting you. They're adjusting to your newfound chase rate, and they're trying to tempt you somewhere else outside the zone, right? And so it goes back up again a little bit, and then Bobby Witt says, "No, I got you. I know what you're doing. I know you changed it from down over here to up over there, whatever it is," and it goes back down again. Michael Harris's shows some adjustability, but if you'd have to take that whole bottom part of Witt's graph and push it up like 10% to get Michael Harris's chart. So I am biased towards seeing that sort of adjustability, even in their rookie season.
I threw Bo Bichette on the screen right now too, just so we could look at that for a moment.
I mean, consistently high, right? There was a little bit of improvement there. 2021 is his second season. Early in the season, he came into the season with I'm not going to chase, and then he chased more and more the rest of the season. This year, you've seen some improvement. That's good.
I'm going to get the Harris chart as well, because I think the way you described it was probably fair and accurate, but also very difficult to visualize if
it looks more like Bo Bichette's first year, where like there is some adjustment, but it ends high,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that peak, if you're looking at kind of where Bichette was at the end of last season,
55% in the last 20 games or so.
Maybe he was a little more of a warning than I realized.
Harris has shown some improvement. I'm not going to pretend he hasn't shown any improvement, but those are still pretty consistently high peaks. And if you look at it, that 45% that he's at right now is where Bobby Witt started.
Yeah. Interesting, though. I do think because he runs and he's been so efficient, especially, and he's on a good team, I think Harris
I'm not trying to say he's a bad player.
No, that's not what we're saying at all. I don't think
anyone's be overvalued in drafts next year. There's going to be a little bit of regression. I might use him to buy Fernando Tatis, even with me being the one between us that might have had more doubt about Tatis's future.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Fun to think about the future in these cases. And I just expect Michael Harris to get some significant ADP lift. I mean, why wouldn't he? He's done a ton as a rookie to get people
We're always
really excited.
Deals.
All the time. So I wanted to ask you about this. The Nationals are likely to have Cade Cavalli come up and make his big league debut on Friday. And we've had some reports in the time since we last recorded that the Diamondbacks are probably going to give Corbin Carroll a look at some point before the end of the season. It sounds like Gunnar Henderson could actually see a little bit of time in Baltimore before the end of the year. The one situation of these three that's unique, of course, Henderson, if he joins the Orioles, is joining a team that actually is within arm's reach of a playoff spot. Both Cavalli and Corbin Carroll will be joining teams that will not be in the postseason this year. But there was a change in the CBA that was designed to get teams to be willing to promote prospects sooner. And there are draft pick rewards for the team if they have a player win the Rookie of the Year award. Why does that matter at the end of this season? Because we've reached a point in the season where you can call up a prospect and he will not accrue enough days of service time to lose Rookie of the Year eligibility for the 2023 season. So I think what's happening is teams are trying to get a sneak peek at how big league ready their prospects are. If you get a look for 35 to 40 days, which is probably going to be about 25 to 30 games, depending on which team calls up which guys when, you can get a better sense with that snapshot of whether or not that player is in fact ready to be a great player from day one next season. And if that's the case, that player has a better chance of winning the Rookie of the Year award and bringing you back draft pick compensation. So I think this is one of those small wrinkles that's having a bigger impact on how teams are managing young players late in the year. I didn't really see this as something that was going to happen, especially for players on non-contending teams.
Yeah, it's just weird how, they make these rules and then you set the front office to it and you have to game it out and, what's our best move here? And analytically, what do the analytics guys say, none of it's really resulted. Has any of this resulted in us seeing prospects, the best players in the minor leagues, in the major leagues more often this year?
It's helping. It's not perfect. It's
You think
better
it's
than
helping?
it was. It's better than it was because under the old rules,
There's
there
no
was
way you'd see Gunnar or whatever.
no chance we'd. Well, the only reason that could have happened previously is the desire to make the playoffs and seeing him as a clear upgrade over.
But what about the
someone
old
in the
September
infield.
roster rules? We used to see prospects come up in September.
A little bit, yeah. And then you could just demote them longer to begin the next season, and then bring them up in mid-May instead of mid-April and preserve the year of service time that way. And I still think there's a chance we'd have that. If someone comes up at the end of the year, gets this look, falls on their face, guess what? Extra seasoning at AAA is now easier to justify. No, we gave him a look. Yeah. He wasn't ready.
Right.
So there's still that.
I mean, among the names you listed, just for fantasy purposes, I'm most excited about Gunnar Henderson. I think there's a role for him. I know they had him playing like first base and stuff.
Yeah, moving him around to the right side of the infield a little bit. Jorge Mateo, I know he comes up every week.
I know we talk about him a lot. He
comes up every week under the radar. He's been very good for about 2.5 months now. He's actually playing well.
God,
it's not just
wins.
the steals anymore.
He's got a league average batting line.
And it's been even better if you look at if you kind of cut the season so far into two parts. The more recent half has been better.
God damn you, Ian Kahn. Wow, he's hitting 317 in the second half.
Yeah.
He's got a 166 WRC plus in the second half.
This is true.
Although second half is a misnomer, right? That means post All-Star break?
I mean, we can do the custom date range game.
It's only 101 plate appearances. Anyway, that's better than I expected. So Jorge Mateo is a building block now?
You could more reasonably look at Mateo in the same way that you've looked at other players that have emerged during rebuilds. Is Mateo this year's version of Mullins, even though the WAR is not going to hit quite as much as Mullins did a year ago? I mean, I think you could probably make that case now.
And I guess by moving him over to first and second, Gunnar Henderson, they're saying that his arm is not necessarily good enough for third because, playing him over Ramon Urias and making Urias, a part-timer with Odor or whatever, or all around the mound seems to make more sense to me. Any case, Gunnar Henderson, I do like the walk rate. The strikeout rate has actually kind of fluctuated up and down. So that's an open question mark is how much contact he'll make. And so therefore what his batting average will be. But the power and speed seem real. And I'd just be watching the swinging strike rate when he comes up early. But I think I'm the most excited about him. Cade Cavalli, he comes out of an organization that I'm unsure about their ability to develop pitchers. His strikeout rate is lackluster. And his performance has frankly been sort of up and down. So I'm on a real wait and see there. I'm not going to put in a big bid if I have to buy him before I get any of my sweet stuff numbers.
Yeah. I was going to say, you don't have the minor league stuff numbers on Cavalli by chance?
I was looking. I don't think he's in my minor league update.
I think Corbin Carroll is actually a little more interesting to me than Henderson if I could only have one of the two. And that was something Al and I talked about earlier this week. It's like, can you actually stash both these guys? Not in many redraft situations, but Carroll is doing everything, and he's running even more than Henderson in the minors. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's now 31 for 36 as a base stealer between AA and AAA this year, and that's in 87 games. It's not even a full minor league season so far for Carroll, and that's coming with power, average, OBP, K rates down with the move up from AA to AAA. I know we've expressed a lot of concerns about the quality of pitching at AAA, but you love to see what he's been doing age to level, especially with all the time he lost last year. Corbin Carroll played 7 games before having shoulder surgery last year, still got promoted a level, and blew through AA in a half season. I mean, he looks like a special player. So I think
Who are you? Who are you demoting, or who are you taking playing time away from? You've got Thomas, Varsho, Stone Garrett, and Jake McCarthy out there from in the outfield spots and DH. You
I think
just
you
mix it all around.
mix it all around, and if you have to play McCarthy and Garrett less, that's totally fine. You live with that.
I think McCarthy and Garrett are lefty righty, so you could actually maybe and McCarthy, Garrett's 26 and McCarthy's 29, 25, but neither of them was a really well regarded prospect. So you could basically put them into a platoon and play Carroll every day, and then if Varsho or Thomas need a blow, you got that extra outfielder.
Play Carson Kelly a little bit less, catch Varsho a little more. A few ways to make
Varsho
it work.
More. Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a downgrade for everybody with regard to playing time if Corbin Carroll comes up, and particularly when it comes to Garrett and McCarthy. But yeah, I'd be super excited. I think Carroll or Gunnar Henderson are my number ones. I know Francisco Alvarez was number one in Baseball America, but that's a real life prospect list, so they're going to give him value for fielding, framing, blocking that does not show up in your fantasy league. And B, I myself have heard some inconsistent reports regarding Francisco Alvarez's abilities to handle certain pitches.
Yeah. Hits the ball very hard, though, when he hits it. But yeah, I think there's a bit of a gap between where these other top prospects are for fantasy purposes and where Alvarez is going to be once he eventually gets that opportunity. We had a few questions come in that we're going to get to in just a minute. I just want to throw this other thing at you before we get to those. Oneil Cruz hitting a ball 122.4 miles per hour. That broke the Statcast record. So Cruz now has a max exit velo that's above anything we've ever seen from Stanton and Judge and the guys that do this stuff more than anybody, which, again, it's one way to look at a player. And I know we've talked about the unique nature of Oneil Cruz on a few different occasions, but clearly no reason at all to doubt the raw power given what we have seen now, up to 19 home runs between the big leagues and AAA so far this season. And I know the slash line is rough right now, 198, 249, 401 entering play on Wednesday. But I do like the Pirates are just riding it out and letting him get those reps at the big league level instead of trying to play the up and down game.
I actually think that there's more of an Austin Riley situation perhaps coming for Cruz than a Giancarlo Stanton situation, even though Cruz has now hit, the hardest ball ever in the Statcast era. And so, the Stanton comparisons are apt in that regard. But when you hear, there's a good Rob Beertemple piece about this. When you hear what Cruz is thinking about, what he's talking about, what the team is talking about, what they see, what people see when he hits, he's stuck in between. And that is something that literally Austin Riley told me in the minor leagues once, where you're stuck anticipating a slider when you get the fastball. You're stuck anticipating a fastball when you get the slider. And I think, looking at his minor league numbers and adding that in and adding the Austin Riley comp, Riley also hits the ball really hard. I think that this is going to click for him at some point. I don't know when it's going to be. Is it going to be this year? Is it going to be next year? Is it going to take a little bit longer? It could, but I do think it's going to click. I think another name that I think of is Jazz Chisholm, where you can focus on all the flaws and be like 38% strikeout rate, 16% swinging strike rate, 51% ground ball rate. The hardest hit ball he hit was on the ground. Well, that's always going to be the case because you hit your hardest hit balls at basically at zero launch angle. And you learn how to trade that oomph for loft to hit homers over the course of your career. I think Cruz has got everything to be a superstar, and I would put him in that Jazz Chisholm, Austin Riley section where maybe it doesn't work out. I'm sure there's got to be some players. Can you think of a player offhand? I didn't ask you to prep for that or anything, but I'm going to keep talking and give you a chance to think about it. But do you think of there's got to be other players in the Austin Riley, Jazz Chisholm mold that didn't make it. Maybe even Andy Marte, who came up with the Braves, was a top prospect, had some issues like this, and never really put it together. But I still believe in Oneil Cruz. This is just another data point for me. I don't know how useful the projections are, because I think he's either going to figure it out and be a superstar and blow past those projections, or not figure it out and play below those projections.
So it really just comes down to the game theory questions, and cost will be a huge part of it. What is it going to take to get Cruz in drafts? Where is his ADP actually going to land? I think because he has more than one way to be very helpful to fantasy players, he's going to carry a much higher draft day price tag than you would expect ordinarily for a player with these flaws. So that makes him really polarizing. There's going to be people that are, yes, let's do it, because if it clicks, it could be Riley, or it could be Jazz, or it could be Aaron Judge. I mean, Aaron Judge's first 27 games in the big leagues at the end of 2016, he had 42 Ks against 9 walks, right? It was a 179, 263, 345 line. Comes back in his first full season, hits 52 home runs, which he's probably going to do for the second time in his career this season. Seems like he's well on his way to doing that.
Yeah, Judge is a good comp too, just because they're so big. They have a bigger strike zone to learn, Like they literally will watch pitches that are balls be called strikes just because they're so tall.
So you can dream on the potential, and you can dream on it happening quickly, because we do have a few guys who have done that, but he doesn't have to turn into Aaron Judge from 2017 to be very valuable. Where would you be comfortable taking on the risk, not knowing what the final 6 weeks of the season holds? If he starts to figure it out before the end of the season, which is possible, that kind of blows things out of the water. But let's just say that things look similar from rate stats today at the end of the season. Like that's where he kind of finishes things off. Where are you comfortable taking on that risk?
Well, that's interesting. Let's see if I have my draft results for my main event, because I did put him on my main event team. And I drafted him in the 14th round, 202. Might have been an overdraft. I could have gotten Eddie Rosario, Josh Donaldson, Nelson Cruz, Robbie Grossman, Adolis Garcia, Trey Mancini in that same grouping. Those would have all been much safer. However, I wanted to take a shot at MI Gold, and I was a little bit behind on that. And the next best middle infielder that got taken after him was Josh Rojas, Brandon Crawford, and Luis Urias. And I thought Cruz represented more upside than those guys. But I would say, looking back, a bit of an overdraft, and I would love to get Oneil Cruz in a similar spot, maybe a little bit higher to represent this. The fact that he's come in and done some good things, 175, 150,
Yeah.
Brendan Rodgers went 162 this year and doesn't steal any bases.
Yeah, I think the mold, the players we need to be looking at are the other top prospects that came up and didn't have success right away. Jared Kelenic, right? He was probably a pick 150, 175 range player. That seems like the draft day
150
floor.
Exactly in my main. Yeah.
Right. That's like the latest I think you're going to get Cruz if things stay where they are. And I think there's a chance if he does good things.
I want him again.
What are you going to do if he creeps up into the 100 to 120 range? Because I love the players that end up in there. There's always veteran players, usually guys between about 27 and 30 years old. They have no playing time questions. They have very stable skills. And usually the wart is IL stint previous season, right? Long-term IL stint.
117 shortstop this year, Carlos Correa. 112, Dansby Swanson.
Yeah, those are the kinds of players you end up passing on.
124, Jake Cronenworth, and 125 of Amed Rosario. So you'd be passing on at least some of those types of guys, or those guys, maybe even specifically, Willie Dom is 127. You'd be passing on them for Cruz. That's a little rough because those guys are more easily projectable and they represent less risk. But it does depend a little bit on my build to date, to that point. if I got some boring good pick type, middle infielders, and I needed to like last year, I needed maybe an infielder that represented more upside, then I could still see myself picking Cruz. What do you think? Some of these guys are going to go up, some of these guys are going down. I think Amed Rosario might end up very similar spot around 125. Who would you take, Oneil Cruz or Amed Rosario?
I think I'd take Amed Rosario. Because Rosario, and I think we've talked about him in the not so distant past, does everything, including batting average. And that's an overlooked category. Run production is probably better than you expect. Power speed combo. So but
power speed light. I mean, Oneil Cruz is going to out homer him and out steal him. But he may do it with a 210 average versus a 284.
I'm changing, man. I'm getting old. I like oatmeal. I really like oatmeal. It's making me not want to call players oatmeal players anymore, or for me to just say, fine, throw some dried cranberries and walnuts or pecans in there and make your oatmeal more interesting.
Ham and egger.
Yeah, I like ham and eggs too. I like everything. I like all food. I'm looking at the Rosario. You know what? I think Rosario's power is a tick lighter than I thought. So I'd probably still pass on Amed Rosario at that spot. I would take Oneil Cruz over Amed Rosario if the prices are close. For some reason, maybe I'm just throwing the Andres Jimenez power into Rosario's profile, which is not fair. And I think Jimenez versus Cruz is actually a tougher toss-up, a much tougher toss-up.
I think Jimenez might be. But I think Jimenez might also go higher than that. I think Amed Rosario is a really interesting thing because you can see his max EV has gotten better. It's actually pretty decent. This year he hit a ball 115. So you could say, the raw power's in there. I do think after you've given a guy 2,600 plate appearances at the big league level, you can kind of avert your eyes from the 55 raw power Fangraphs gave him 5 years ago or 6 years ago, or 7 years ago, even at this point. And then max EV becomes less meaningful, as a descriptor of his potential raw power. I mean, he's had a 51% ground ball rate his whole career. It doesn't seem like he's about to change it.
No, he's not. So I'm firmly on the Cruz over Rosario side after the initial.
Right. I finally convinced you of something. Usually you convince me of something.
All right. I'm looking at the results from that Rob DiPietro draft I mentioned earlier. Andres Jimenez did go in the early part of round 6. That would have been pick 78. So there are believers out there.
That's what I was saying. Yeah. So where did Amed Rosario go?
They only did 7 rounds, or at least they only shared 7 rounds so far, and he didn't get picked, which makes sense.
And Cruz did not either go either.
I don't see him. No, Oneil Cruz did not get scooped up. But I would imagine right around that round 8, round 9 range of a 15-teamers when people are going to start thinking about him for all these reasons. There's so many things he can do. If it clicks quickly, it's to the moon, which is really exciting.
I think, it's a good reason to pick oatmeal early is that you can be available for this kind of a pick at that kind of part of the draft. If you're taking shots on Bobby Witt in the second round, then when it comes to here, you got to take Amed Rosario. You know what I mean? You can't take Bobby Witt. I'm talking about last year's Bobby Witt and Oneil Cruz on the same team. I mean, you can, but then that's risk on top of risk. I feel like, you're just that's boom or bust, baby. Who's the equivalent of that? Gunnar Henderson. You can't next year be like, I'm taking. It's not Gunnar Henderson's not going to go where Bobby Witt went. Who's like a? Are you sure? A top 5 prospect? Maybe. I mean, yeah, it could be. Yeah, I'm going to take Gunnar Henderson in the 4th and Oneil Cruz in the 8th, and I'm going to win this thing, baby.
That's the way I used to play, and it's amazing when it works, but it doesn't usually work.
Yeah, right.
Or what happens is You have the team that's really exciting, and if you're on the radio, hey, come talk to us about your team, and you're talking about
Oh
how
yeah,
great you think those guys are going to be.
Love to talk to you. You took those big chances.
And the only reason you did well was because you did some other things well that were really boring that they wouldn't even ask you
they
about.
Didn't want to talk to you about.
But, you crushed it with a few really old guys that ended up with bigger roles in rounds 15, 19, and 22. At the time you did it, you thought you were going to cut those players, and you happened to be right about 2 out of the 3 or all 3, and they bailed you out from the risk you took on earlier. It was actually the fact that
your last 3 picks were Corey Kluber, Jordan Montgomery. And
right. You tend to need to do a lot of other things right with the boring picks if you're going to go really aggressive with these early high risk, high reward type players. But at Deadpool Hitter on Twitter, no hyphens, no spaces. If you're looking to see that board, it's back, 15, 20 tweets. So some really interesting names sprinkled in there. A lot of very sharp drafters in that particular event, and probably a good indicator of what early NFBC drafts are going to look like given the makeup of that league. Let's get to a couple questions real quick before we go. The first mailbag question had 2 players in particular about it. Yoán Moncada was actually a drop in a league, and he's been a strange player this year. Top team cut him, and I used a waiver claim to give him a spin for the final month or so. Wondering if you guys are in or out on him getting back to being an above average hitter. I'll be considering against other guys like Justin Turner and Jake Fraley for a final keeper slot. Wow, it's been a rough couple of years for Moncada to be down in old Turner versus Fraley versus Moncada for a final keeper spot sort of decision.
The speed seems absolutely gone. So I might actually take that flyer on Fraley, especially if it's a league that rewards OBP. I mean, it sounds like it is. He's talking about it being above average player. That sounds like positive WRC plus. The rest of the season projection for Moncada is 104 WRC plus, and that does not even account for the fact that he doesn't have steals, So I think this is a player that was very exciting and athletic and young, and then he had a real bad time of it with COVID in 2020. I don't want to speculate that alone, removed his athleticism, but in the meantime, now he just doesn't look as athletic, and the flaws that he had in terms of his contact rate and his approach are standing out much more than his athleticism.
If you made me buy blind on one of Moncada or Fraley for next season, I would take Moncada. I think the playing time is safer. He's still a good defender. I'm really interested to see if you make some adjustments in the offseason. The underlying numbers are not as exciting as they used to be. There's still a lot of swing and miss. He's walking a bit less. So you're kind of asking yourself, bounce back to what? 230, 240 with a decent OBP and 15 to 20 home run power. You got to be in a reasonably deep mixed league to be pretty excited about keeping him there. So definitely not the no-brainer pick up in that situation and hold that he would have been just a couple of seasons ago. And it's hard to make decisions like that.
And some love for Fraley. I mean, they're both 27, and this is the best swinging strike rate Fraley's ever had. This is the best strikeout rate Fraley's ever had. This is the longest stretch of everyday run, I think. I mean, he's had some close ones in Seattle, but a lot of those plate appearances were accrued in a part-time role. Players will tell you that you improve when you get given everyday shots. I was just talking to JD Davis about that, where he's just like, just your ability to adjust and to see what's coming, is so much better if you're playing every day. And then the last thing, this is coming out this week, but I learned recently that there are some fast twitch abilities that you start losing, that your body starts losing as quickly as 2 to 3 days. So, if you're not playing every day, there's a chance that you're losing your max bat speed in those days because you're not even facing live pitching. So there could be an actual physical component to not playing every day that benefits you. So in Fraley, I see someone who's projected for very similarly by WRC plus, who's going to give you more speed and whose career is shaped in a better direction compared to Moncada's. That's my thing for him. I do agree with you that if you just ask me those names and you and we were drinking at a bar, I'd say Yoán Moncada.
But with the laptop, with the
laptop
right in front of you, with a little more careful consideration, it's a legitimate, tough decision. But I think it's going to come down to playing time, and I still think there's one more year for Moncada to be an everyday guy before the White Sox start to look elsewhere if it doesn't turn around. Yeah. So I think he can make good on that. Last question here. This also came from Mike, who sent us the Yoán Moncada question, was Ranger Suarez. Are we believing what he's been doing more recently after that dismal start?
Not really. There's a great tweet from Vlad Rotogut.
Yeah, Vlad
Sedler. That where he actually predicted Suarez's current run earlier in the season, and his reasoning was that he was going to get right on the schedule, and I agree with him. I think it's just getting right on the schedule. If you look at his stuff plus numbers, they are still lackluster. He hovers between 80 and 90 stuff plus. He does have average command and a wide pitch mix, but he's only had 4 appearances this year where his pitching plus was above average. So I think he's just a player that hit a nice part of the schedule.
I was pretty skeptical coming into the season. I do think if you look at the projections, kind of a upper 3s ERA, 120s, maybe low 130s whip, what you see right now with the ratios is probably about what you get in a typical year.
Well, I think it's on the higher end. I mean,
risk for that because of the
130 ballpark whip, and a 7K9, you don't usually have a 338 ERA.
Yeah, it's not a profile that I'd ordinarily want to chase. If I do chase that profile, it's because I like the park. I don't like the park for Ranger Suarez. So very schedule dependent. I think that's probably the tagline we're going to have on Suarez for the foreseeable future.
Washington, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati at home, at Miami,
yeah,
at Washington.
Yeah, those are good spots. Those are all fine.
Yes, he did pitch well. Atlanta at home and at Cincinnati, but that's at Cincinnati after the trade deadline. They definitely are not a very good lineup right now.
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair at all to say about the Reds in their current form. Thanks a lot for those questions, Mike. If you have a question for a future episode, drop us a line, ratesandbarrels@theathletic.com, or you can drop a question in the comments section under the video on YouTube. Be sure to like this video if you're watching us on YouTube, and take a moment to leave us a nice rating and review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, anywhere that would allow you to rate and review the podcast. If you don't have a subscription to The Athletic, you can get one for $1 a month for the first 6 months at theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.